The courtroom was brighter than I expected. White light poured through the tall windows and reflected off the polished floor, making everything look colder than it really was. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy jacket and kept walking. At the defense table, my son, Caleb, turned when he heard my footsteps. His expression changed for only a second, then came the smile. Not a warm smile. Not the smile of the little boy who used to run toward me whenever he scraped his knee. This one was controlled, practiced, almost satisfied. Beside him sat his wife, Brooke. Her red-painted nails tapped lightly against the table. She leaned toward Caleb and whispered something. They both laughed. The bailiff called my name. Judith Parker, responding party. I walked forward. My heels echoed across the courtroom as I took my seat. I placed my hands neatly in my lap and looked toward the judge. Judge Mercer opened the file. He read the first page, then the second, then he stopped. His expression tightened. He looked toward Caleb's attorney. She is the person you're asking this court to place under conservatorship? The lawyer cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Mercer looked directly at me. Mrs. Parker, how old are you? 66. And you live independently? Yes. Are you employed? I retired 3 years ago. Before that, I worked in the city's finance department for 32 years. The judge nodded. And you currently manage your own finances. I have always managed my own finances. Something shifted in the room. Brooke stopped tapping her nails. Caleb adjusted his tie. Judge Mercer turned another page. I've read the allegations, he said. Claims of confusion, financial mismanagement, and diminished capacity. I'd like to see the evidence supporting those claims. His voice wasn't angry. That somehow made it more powerful. All of it. I didn't smile. I didn't need to, because they had prepared for a helpless old woman. They hadn't prepared for me. The first letter had arrived 3 months earlier. It came in a white envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. There was no return address, only the name of a law firm I'd never heard of. I opened it at my kitchen table while my tea cooled beside me. Dear Mrs. Parker, we represent Mr. Caleb Parker regarding concerns about family financial matters. I read the rest slowly. They wanted bank statements, tax records, trust documents, party information. The letter ended with a polite suggestion that my ability to manage complicated financial responsibilities might need to be reviewed. I barely slept that night. The second letter arrived 7 days later. This one was less polite. It mentioned patterns of confusion. It recommended a medical evaluation. I sat at my desk and read that paragraph 3 times. The same desk where Caleb had once done his homeworks, the same drawer still held the small blue shoes he'd worn as a toddler. By the third letter, I wasn't shocked anymore. I was tired. Attached to that letter was a draft petition. Caleb was listed as the petitioner. My son, the child I'd raised alone, the man I'd spent decades protecting. I called Richard Hale, the estate attorney, who had helped me establish my trust after my husband died. He answered immediately. Judith? I received something today. What kind of something? A petition. There was a long silence. Bring everything, he finally said. Don't throw anything away. I gathered the letters, the bank notices, the medical records. The petition, then I opened the oldest drawer in my study. Inside was a leather ledger I'd kept for nearly 30 years. I had started it after my husband, Thomas, died suddenly. Caleb had been 7. I remembered that morning clearly. The phone call, the nurse's trembling voice, the cereal bowl slipping from Caleb's hands and shattering against the kitchen floor. Thomas was gone before I could say goodbye. I didn't cry in front of Caleb. There would be time for that later. Instead, I sold Thomas's car. I took a second job at a hospital. I kept my city position during the day and worked nights whenever I could. I stopped buying things I didn't need. I sold my engagement ring. I packed lunches instead of eating at restaurants. When Caleb was 10, I saved enough to send him to a science camp he'd been dreaming about. When he was 16, I skipped a medical appointment so I could buy him a suit for his first internship. When he graduated from college, I had already taken out a private loan in my own name so he wouldn't begin adulthood buried under debt. I never kept track because I wanted gratitude. I kept track because numbers never lied. People did. Now my own son was sitting in court, Trying to convince a judge that I couldn't manage my own life, I closed the ledger. Then I looked at Richard. "Let's see how much they actually know about me." He nodded. "That's exactly what we're going to find out." Richard spread the documents across his office table. He didn't rush. That was one thing I'd always appreciated about him. He treated paperwork like evidence, not decoration. He picked up the first letter. "Who delivered this?" "Certified mail." He nodded. "The second?" "Same. And this petition?" "Hand-delivered by a process server." Richard read silently for several minutes. Then he looked up. "They're asking for control over your finances." "I know. They're also suggesting your house should eventually be liquidated." My stomach tightened. "My house?" Richard turned the petition toward me. There it was, buried beneath several pages of legal language, was a request concerning property that could be redistributed for equitable family interests. I stared at the sentence. "They want my house." Richard didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he said finally. "That's what this appears to mean." I leaned back. For the first time, the situation felt different. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about my memory. It wasn't even about Caleb believing I was incapable. It was about control and money. I thought about Brooke. 3 months earlier, she'd appeared at my front door on a Sunday morning carrying a box of pastries. "I thought we could organize your paperwork," she'd said. I remember laughing. "My paperwork is already organized." She smiled. "Of course it is. But we could make everything digital. You know, just in case something happens." Something about the phrase had bothered me. Still, Caleb had brought groceries that morning, and I didn't want to create tension. So I let her into the study. I told her she could scan copies. Nothing original. She sat at my desk for almost 2 hours. When I returned with coffee, half my folders had been rearranged. Brooke was sitting in front of my computer. "You really keep everything," she said. 30 years in city finance teaches you that." She smiled. "I can see that. I didn't think much about it at the time. I should have." A few weeks later, I noticed an alert on my bank account. A new user profile had been added. I hadn't created it. I called the bank immediately. They investigated and told me there had also been an attempted update to my power of attorney. "I never requested that," I said. The representative emailed me a copy. I printed it, then I sat very still. My name was on the document, so was my address. My driver's license information had been attached, and beneath it was a signature that looked almost like mine. Almost, but I knew my own handwriting. The loop in my first initial was wrong, the final stroke was too long. Someone had copied my signature. Richard examined the document under his desk lamp. "This isn't your signature." "No." "Who had access to your identification?" I looked at him. "Brooke." He nodded slowly. "Did she ever have access to your computer?" "Yes." "Your files?" "Yes." "Your identification?" I hesitated. "Once." Richard's expression hardened. "Tell me exactly what happened." I explained everything. The scanning, the folders, the computer. The flash drive Brooke said she'd used to send me copies. She never sent them. Richard wrote everything down. Then he asked about my original documents. I went home that evening and opened the fireproof box. My passport was there. The property deed was there. My medical directives were there. The original trust was there. But something was wrong. The divider marked legal had been moved. I pulled out the trust. The pages were out of order. I counted them twice. One page was missing. I knew exactly which page it was. The page describing who controlled the property if I became incapacitated. My hands began to shake. I called Richard. "It's missing." "What is?" "A page from the trust." He went silent. "Don't touch anything else," he said. "I'm coming over." When he arrived, he photographed the entire box. Then he photographed every document. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't need to. The missing page was enough to make him suspicious. The next morning, we contacted the bank. They provided access records. There had been an unusual login on the exact afternoon Brooke had been in my study. Someone had attempted to modify my account information. Richard requested copies of everything. Then he asked me one question. "Do you still have that home security camera?" "Yes." "Does it record inside the house?" "Only the study and hallway." "Why?" "After someone broke in 5 years ago." He nodded. "Let's check it." We watched the footage that night. Most of it was ordinary. Me carrying groceries, me watering plants, a delivery driver leaving a package. Then Brooke appeared. She sat at my desk. She opened a drawer. She removed my identification. I stopped breathing. She placed it beside the scanner. Then she opened my computer, my own computer. She typed for several minutes. A phone rang. Brooke answered quietly. "Yes," she said. She paused. "I'll get it today." Then she looked directly toward the camera. For half a second, her smile disappeared. Richard leaned closer to the screen. "That's enough." I stared at the frozen image. My daughter-in-law had been in my home, at my desk, using my identification. And now my son was telling a judge I couldn't take care of myself. Richard copied the footage to a secure drive. Then he opened another folder. "There's something else." He showed me a medical affidavit. It had been signed by my doctor 3 weeks before the evaluation Caleb had submitted to the court. The statement was clear. I was mentally competent. I understood my finances. I understood my property. I was fully capable of managing my affairs. Richard looked at me. They built their entire petition around a medical report. "Yes, and we have evidence that contradicts it." I nodded. "What happens now?" He closed the folder. "Now we stop defending your dignity and start proving their deception." The next hearing was scheduled for Friday. I didn't sleep much that week. Not because I was afraid, because I kept asking myself the same question. How could my son do this? Caleb had been the boy who waited on the porch for his father's car, the boy who cried when Thomas didn't come home, the boy who held my hand at the funeral, the boy I'd promised I'd protect. And now he was sitting across from me in court, not as my son, as the man trying to take control of everything I'd spent a lifetime protecting. On Friday morning, I walked into the courtroom carrying one blue binder. I didn't know it yet, but inside that binder was enough evidence to change everything. The courtroom was nearly full when I arrived. I carried the blue binder against my chest and followed Richard toward our table. Caleb was already there. Brooke sat beside him, whispering to their attorney. When Caleb saw me, his expression changed. For a moment, I saw the little boy again, then it vanished. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Mercer entered, and everyone stood. Once we were seated, he looked through the petition. "Counsel," he said, "we are here to determine whether there is sufficient evidence supporting the requested conservatorship." Caleb's attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor." He spoke calmly. Too calmly. He described me as increasingly confused. He claimed I'd made financial mistakes. He mentioned a duplicated check, a missed appointment, a voicemail where I supposedly confused a date. Each example sounded harmless by itself. Together, he wanted them to sound dangerous. Then he said something that made my hands tighten. "Mrs. Parker's family believes she is no longer capable of making responsible decisions regarding significant assets." Family, he said the word as though it included everyone except me. Judge Mercer looked toward Richard. "Your response?" Richard stood. "My client has managed her own financial affairs for decades. She spent 32 years working in municipal finance. She has no documented history of incapacity." Caleb's lawyer interrupted. "We have a medical evaluation." Richard looked at him. "You have one medical report." The judge raised his hand. "Enough. We'll address the evidence one piece at a time." Caleb was called to testify. He walked to the witness stand. I watched him raise his right hand. "Do you swear that the testimony you give will be truthful?" "I do." His voice was quiet. Richard remained seated. Caleb's attorney began. "Mr. Parker, why did you become concerned about your mother's ability to manage her affairs?" Caleb looked at me. His eyes were wet. "I noticed changes." "What kind of changes?" "She forgot things." Specific examples, he gave them. A check supposedly written twice, a missed date, a voicemail, a grocery purchase he said I couldn't explain. Richard wrote something down. I stared at my son. I knew every example. The duplicated check had been a bank error, corrected the same day. The appointment had been rescheduled online. The voicemail had been left months before, when I was speaking about a completely different date. Nothing was evidence of incapacity, but Caleb presented it as though it were. His attorney asked one final question. "Did you believe your mother was vulnerable?" Caleb swallowed. "Yes." Richard stood. "Mr. Parker, You submitted a medical evaluation from Dr. Levin? Yes. And that evaluation says your mother lacks capacity? Yes. Richard nodded. Did you personally attend that evaluation? No. Did you arrange it? Caleb hesitated. Brooke helped. Richard looked toward Brooke, then back at Caleb. Did your mother authorize the evaluation? I believed it was necessary. That wasn't my question. Caleb's jaw tightened. I don't know. Richard opened the blue binder. Let's discuss the documents you submitted. The courtroom became quiet. He handed the first document to the judge. My client's physician, Dr. Patel, examined her 3 weeks before the evaluation submitted by the petitioner. Judge Mercer read the affidavit. His eyebrows rose slightly. Dr. Patel states Mrs. Parker is fully competent? Yes, Your Honor. Richard handed over another document. This is the doctor's notarized statement. Then another, bank access records, then another, the attempted power of attorney modification. Caleb shifted in his chair. Richard continued. And this is the signature used on that document. He placed a copy before the judge. Mrs. Parker disputes signing it. Judge Mercer looked at me. Did you sign this? No, Your Honor. Are you certain? Completely? Richard turned toward Caleb. Mr. Parker, were you aware of this power of attorney request? Caleb looked at his lawyer. I don't remember. Richard didn't react. Were you aware that your wife accessed your mother's computer? I don't know. Were you aware that your wife had access to your mother's identification? Silence. Caleb looked at Brooke. Brooke stared at the floor. Richard returned to the table. Your Honor, we'd like to introduce surveillance footage. The judge nodded. A screen was brought forward. The lights dimmed, the footage began. There was Brooke sitting at my desk, opening my drawer, taking my identification, placing it beside the scanner, then accessing my computer. The courtroom remained silent. Brooke's face had gone pale. Richard paused the footage. Then he played the audio. Brooke's voice came through clearly. I'll get it today. The judge leaned forward. Who was she speaking to? We don't know, Richard said. But we have the call timestamp. Caleb stared at the screen. His face had lost all color. Richard turned toward him. One final question. Caleb didn't answer. Did your mother ever tell you she wanted you to control her finances? No. Did she ever sign a power of attorney giving you that authority? No. Did she ever tell you she wanted her house sold? Caleb's voice cracked. No. Richard nodded. No further questions. Caleb stepped down. He didn't look at me. Brooke followed him with her eyes. For the first time since this began, she looked frightened. Judge Mercer removed his glasses. I want counsel for both sides in chambers. The attorneys stood. Richard touched my shoulder. Stay here. I watched them disappear through the courtroom doors. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Caleb remained standing near the witness area. Brooke sat alone. Then Caleb slowly turned toward me. His lips moved. Mom. I looked at him. He took one step forward. I raised my hand, not angrily, just enough to stop him. He froze. Because there were some things that couldn't be repaired in a hallway. Not yet. The courtroom doors opened again. Judge Mercer returned to the bench. Everyone stood. I sat down. The judge looked directly at Caleb, then at Brooke, then at the documents spread across his desk. His voice was calm, but the room suddenly felt colder. Before this court makes a ruling, there are several matters concerning the authenticity and origin of the submitted documents that require immediate attention. Richard looked at me. I looked straight ahead. For the first time, I knew the truth wasn't merely going to defend me. It was going to expose them. Judge Mercer returned to the bench with a folder in his hands. He placed it beside the petition and looked at both attorneys. I have serious concerns about the documents submitted in support of this petition. Caleb sat rigidly. Brooke had stopped moving altogether. The judge continued. Specifically, the alleged power of attorney, the medical evaluation, and the circumstances surrounding their submission. Richard stood. Your Honor, we'd like to address those concerns with additional evidence. Proceed. Richard opened the blue binder again. This document is my client's original trust. He handed it forward. The version submitted by the petitioners appears to omit a page. The judge compared the copies. His expression hardened. Which page? the provision governing management of Mrs. Parker's property if she became incapacitated. The courtroom became completely silent. Richard continued. That provision is significant because the petition requests control over Mrs. Parker's financial assets and property. Judge Mercer looked at Caleb. Mr. Parker, did you possess an original copy of your mother's trust? No. Did your wife? Caleb hesitated. I don't know. Richard turned toward Brooke. Mrs. Parker's daughter-in-law was in possession of copies of several financial documents. Brooke's attorney stood. Your Honor, possession of copies proves nothing. Richard nodded. Agreed. He opened another folder. That's why we have access records. He placed them before the judge. These records show that an unauthorized user attempted to modify Mrs. Parker's banking information shortly after Mrs. Parker's daughter-in-law visited her home. The judge read the dates. Then he looked at Brooke. Do you dispute that you were at Mrs. Parker's residence on this date? Brooke's attorney answered. She was there. Did she access the computer? The attorney hesitated. I don't know. Judge Mercer looked at Brooke. Did you? Brooke's lips parted, then closed. Finally, she whispered, Yes. Did you access financial documents? I was helping organize them. That wasn't my question. Brooke lowered her eyes. I may have seen some. Richard stepped forward. And did you remove or copy any identification documents? Brooke didn't answer. The judge waited. She finally whispered, I don't remember. Richard returned to the binder. Fortunately, Your Honor, memory isn't necessary here. He pressed a button. The surveillance footage appeared again. Brooke taking my identification. Brooke placing it beside the scanner. Brooke accessing my computer. The courtroom watched without a sound. Then Richard paused the video. This footage was recorded automatically by my client's security system. The judge nodded. Admitted. Richard produced another document. This is a sworn statement from the bank confirming that Mrs. Parker did not authorize the power of attorney request. Judge Mercer read it, then he looked at me. Mrs. Parker, did you ever give your son permission to manage your financial affairs? No. Did you ever give his wife permission? No. Did you ask either of them to prepare documents on your behalf? No. He nodded. Then he turned to Caleb. Mr. Parker, I want you to answer carefully. Did you believe your mother was incapable of managing her finances? Caleb swallowed. Yes. Based on what? He looked at Brooke, then at his attorney. Finally, he looked at me. I thought she was becoming forgetful. That is not what I asked. Caleb's shoulders dropped. I was worried. Judge Mercer leaned back. Worry is not evidence. Caleb said nothing. The judge turned to Richard. Anything else? Richard opened the leather ledger. This was maintained by my client for decades. He placed it on the table. It contains records of financial assistance she provided to her son and his wife. Caleb looked up. Richard continued. College expenses, housing assistance, mortgage support, emergency transfers. He turned a page. $27,000 transferred when the petitioner's wife lost her employment. Brooke's face changed. Another page. $5,000 transferred immediately before their mortgage closing. Caleb stared at the ledger. I watched him. He had never known I'd kept those records. Not because I wanted to hold them over him. Because numbers were how I'd survived. Richard closed the ledger. We are not presenting these records to demand repayment. We are presenting them because the petition suggests Mrs. Parker has historically been unable to manage money. He looked at the judge. The evidence shows the opposite. Judge Mercer nodded. Understood. The judge turned toward Caleb. Mr. Parker, did you know your mother provided these funds? Caleb's eyes filled. Yes. Did you know the extent of them? No, I finally spoke. He didn't need to. Everyone looked at me. I kept my voice steady. I never helped my son, so he would owe me. Caleb looked down. I helped him because he was my son. For the first time, his face broke. He covered his mouth. Brooke touched his arm. He pulled away. Judge Mercer allowed the silence to remain. Then he addressed both attorneys. This petition was presented as a protective action. He paused. But the evidence now raises serious questions about whether the petitioner or someone acting with him attempted to create the circumstances used to justify that protection. Richard nodded. Caleb looked terrified. Brooke whispered something to her lawyer. The judge continued. I am not making a criminal finding today. He glanced at the documents. But I am referring the questionable materials for appropriate review. Brooke's attorney stood. Your Honor? The judge raised his hand. I suggest you let me finish. The attorney sat down. Judge Mercer looked at me. Mrs. Parker, based on the evidence before this court, I see no basis for conservatorship. My chest loosened. But I will issue the final ruling after reviewing the complete record. The gavel struck. The hearing was adjourned. People began leaving. Caleb remained seated. I gathered my papers. Richard touched my elbow. You all right? I nodded. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Mom! I stopped. I didn't turn immediately. Caleb's voice shook. I didn't know. I closed my eyes. There was so much I wanted to say, but none of it could fit into one sentence. Finally, I turned. You didn't know what? That Brooke. He couldn't finish. I looked at him. You didn't need to know everything about Brooke. He swallowed. You needed to know me. His eyes filled with tears. I picked up my bag. That's what hurts most. Then I walked away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away because I had somewhere else to go. I was walking away because I finally understood that protecting my son could no longer mean protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. The final hearing was held 2 weeks later. By then, the story had changed. At the first hearing, Caleb had been confident. Brooke had been composed. Now neither of them looked at me. I arrived early with Richard. The courtroom was quieter than before. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. Everyone knew what was coming. Judge Mercer entered and reviewed the file one final time. Please be seated. We sat. He began by summarizing the evidence, the disputed power of attorney, the unauthorized banking activity, the surveillance footage, the conflicting medical evaluations, the missing page from my trust. The judge spoke slowly, carefully. There is insufficient evidence establishing that Mrs. Parker lacks the capacity to manage her personal or financial affairs. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Judge Mercer continued. The evidence presented by the petitioner contains significant inconsistencies. Caleb lowered his head. Brooke stared straight ahead. The court also finds credible evidence indicating that documents may have been obtained or submitted without Mrs. Parker's authorization. Richard remained perfectly still. I listened. For months, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would feel victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. The judge looked toward Caleb. Mr. Parker, your petition is dismissed. The gavel struck once. The sound was surprisingly small. That was it. No dramatic announcement. No celebration. Just a wooden block touching a desk. The case that had threatened my home, my independence, and my relationship with my son was over. But Judge Mercer wasn't finished. He ordered that the questionable documents be preserved and referred for appropriate review. He also stated that any future attempt to interfere with my financial affairs would be treated seriously. Then he turned toward me. Mrs. Parker, you are free to leave. I nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. I gathered my bag. Richard stood beside me. We walked toward the exit. Mom. Caleb's voice stopped me. I turned. He stood several feet away. Brooke was behind him. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Something else, maybe certainty. Maybe pride, maybe both had disappeared. Can we talk? I looked at Richard. He didn't say anything. I turned back to Caleb. Not here. He nodded. Okay. Outside, sunlight covered the courthouse steps. I walked toward the parking lot. Caleb followed. Mom, I swear I didn't know Brooke was doing all of that. I stopped. Then why did you file the petition? He looked down. I thought I was helping. You never asked me. I was afraid. Of what? That you'd lose everything. I stared at him. I already lost something. He looked up. You. His face crumpled. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was telling him the truth. You decided I was incapable before you decided to speak to me. He wiped his eyes. I made a mistake. No. He looked confused. That wasn't one mistake, Caleb. I pointed toward the courthouse. You filed papers. I raised one finger. You submitted a medical report. Another, you allowed someone else to question my finances. Another, you tried to gain authority over my property. He couldn't answer. That isn't one mistake, he whispered. I'm sorry. I believed he was sorry. That didn't mean everything was fixed. I'm going home, I said. Can I come? I shook my head. Not today. He nodded slowly. I walked to Richard's car. He drove me home. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Richard asked, "Do you want me to stay?" I looked out the window. "No, you sure?" "Yes." He nodded. When we reached my house, I sat in the driveway for a moment. The house looked exactly the same. The white porch, the old maple tree, the flower pot beside the front door, but I wasn't the same woman who had left that morning. I unlocked the door. The familiar smell of the hallway greeted me. For a moment, I stood still. This house had been my life for decades. It had held birthdays, funerals, Christmas mornings, school projects, arguments, quiet dinners. Thomas's boots had once sat beside that back door. Caleb had once learned to ride his bicycle across that driveway. And now, for the first time, I understood something. A home wasn't only the place where memories happened. It was also the place where you learned what you would no longer tolerate. I walked into the study. The blue binder was still on my desk. I opened it. Then I opened the bottom drawer. The leather ledger was there. I lifted it carefully. The pages were worn. I began turning them. There was the science camp, the college loan, the internship suit, the mortgage payment, the emergency transfer, $27,000 for Brooke's lost job, $5,000 before their mortgage closed, page after page. I had forgotten some of the amounts, but the ledger hadn't. I smiled sadly. I had spent decades believing love meant giving without keeping score, and perhaps it still did. But I had learned something else. Love without boundaries could become permission. I closed the ledger. I didn't write anything about the court case. I didn't write anything about Caleb's betrayal. Some things didn't belong in a financial record. They belonged somewhere deeper. That evening, I made tea. I sat on the porch. The same porch where I had once waited for Thomas. The same porch where I'd carried a sleeping 7-year-old Caleb inside after he fell asleep waiting for his father. The street was quiet. A car passed. A dog barked somewhere nearby. My phone rang. I looked at the screen, Caleb. I let it ring, not because I hated him, because for the first time I was choosing when I was ready to answer. The call ended. A minute later, a message appeared. I didn't open it. I simply placed the phone beside my tea. Then I looked toward the sunset. For years, I'd believed my greatest responsibility was protecting my son. Now, I realized something I should have understood much earlier. I had spent my whole life protecting everyone else. It was finally time to protect myself. Part 6. The life that was still mine. The house was quiet that night, not empty. Yet, there was a difference. For years, I'd mistaken silence for loneliness. After Thomas died, every quiet room had reminded me of what was missing. After Caleb moved away, the house had felt larger. After the court case, I thought the silence would feel unbearable. Instead, it felt like breathing room. I woke early the next morning. Sunlight slipped through the bedroom curtains and landed across the floor. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake thinking about court documents. I didn't think about signatures. I didn't think about bank records. I didn't think about whether someone had entered my home while I was asleep. I made coffee. Then I opened the back door. The morning air was cool. I walked into the garden and began pulling weeds around the rose bushes. Thomas had planted those roses during our first year in the house. He'd told me they would outlive us. I had laughed at him. Now I understood. Some things did. Around noon, I finally checked my phone. There were 3 messages from Caleb. The first was an apology. The second asked if I was safe. The third said he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. I read them twice. Then I put the phone down. I didn't answer immediately, not because I wanted to punish him, because forgiveness wasn't the same thing as pretending nothing happened. That afternoon, Richard called. "The review has begun," he said. I knew what he meant. The questionable documents had been referred for further investigation. Will it affect Caleb? I don't know. I sighed. I don't want revenge. I know. I just want the truth. You have that already. He was right. The truth was no longer something I had to prove to myself. I knew who I was. I knew what I'd built. I knew what I'd sacrificed, and I knew what I would never allow again. A week later, I finally invited Caleb to the house. He arrived alone. No Brooke, no attorney, just my son standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets. He looked nervous. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes moved around the hallway. He looked at the old photographs, at the staircase, at the framed picture of Thomas. Then he whispered, "I remember this place." "I know." He swallowed. "I remember Dad carrying me up those stairs." He did that every night for months. Caleb smiled faintly, then his expression collapsed again. "Mom, I'm sorry." I sat across from him. He remained standing. "You can sit." He did. "I believed Brooke," he said. "I know. She told me you were forgetting things." I said nothing. She showed me things that made it seem real. "What things?" He looked down. Bank alerts, notes, documents. Documents she had taken from my house. His eyes closed. "Yes. I waited. I should have asked you." "Yes. I should have come to you." "Yes. I should have trusted you." I looked at him. "Yes." He nodded. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I leaned back. "Good." He looked surprised. "I can forgive you someday," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean you get the same access to my life." He nodded slowly. "I understand. I hope you do." We sat in silence. Then he said something unexpected. "Do you remember the science camp?" I smiled. "You were terrified on the first day. I thought everyone would be smarter than me." "You were 10. I know. You came home knowing how to build a model rocket." He laughed softly. "I blew up the mailbox." "You did." For a few seconds we were simply mother and son again. Then reality returned. Caleb stood. "I'll give you space." I nodded. At the door he stopped. "Mom? Yes, thank you." I looked at him. "For what?" "For everything." I didn't answer because there were some debts no apology could settle. But perhaps acknowledging them was the beginning. After he left, I stood on the porch for a long time. Then I went inside. I opened the bottom drawer. The leather ledger was still there. I ran my fingers across its worn cover. For decades, I'd recorded every expense, every sacrifice, every payment. But I realized I didn't need to keep proving that I'd been a good mother. I knew. So I took a blank page and wrote one final entry. Not a dollar amount, not a receipt. Just a sentence. I wrote, "I choose my life now." Then I closed the ledger. I didn't lock the drawer. I simply walked away. The following months were different. I joined a local gardening group. I started volunteering at the community library. I traveled to the coast for a week. I replaced the old kitchen curtains. I finally repaired the guest room window I'd ignored for years. Small things, ordinary things, but they belonged to me. One Saturday morning, I stood in the kitchen making pancakes. The house smelled like butter and coffee. My phone buzzed, a message from Caleb. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for access. He wasn't asking me to fix something. He simply wrote, "Hope you're having a good morning, Mom." I smiled. Then I replied, "You too." It was only 2 words, but they felt like the first 2 words of a different future. Not the old relationship, not yet. Something new, something built on boundaries instead of sacrifice. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The house was still mine. The trust was intact. My finances were safe. My name belonged to me again. But those weren't the greatest things I'd gained. The greatest thing was something I hadn't expected. I had finally stopped measuring my worth by how much I could give other people. For most of my life, I'd been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's provider, someone's safety net. But beneath all those roles, there had always been a woman named Judith Parker, a woman who had worked, saved, loved, survived, and endured more than she ever admitted. She was still here, and she wasn't finished. I looked toward the porch light. Thomas had once waited beneath that same light. Caleb had once fallen asleep beneath it. Now I sat there alone, and for the first time, alone didn't mean abandoned. It meant free. I took a slow breath. Then I smiled. The house was quiet. But this time, the quiet belonged to me.